The Yengishiki. Shinto rituals, in English. First, the HARAE KOTOBA, Ritual of Purification. Ye great gods of HARAE, who were born when the great Izanagi cleansed his body at Tsukushi no Himukura no Tachibana no Odona Hawahigara, hear my wish to be purified and cleansed of any ill fortunes, sins, and evil energy from which I may suffer. The Harvest Ritual. I declare, in the presence of the sovereign gods of the harvest, if the sovereign gods will bestow, in many bundled spikes and luxuriant spikes, the late ripening harvest which they will bestow, and the late ripening harvest which will be produced by the dripping of foam from the arms, and by drawing the mud together between the opposing thighs. Then I will fulfill their praises, be presented the first fruits of 1,000 ears, and in many 100 ears, raising high the beer jars, filling and ranging the rows of bellies of the beer jars. I will present them in juice and in grain, as these things which grow in the great field plain, sweet herbs and bitter herbs, as to things which dwell in the deep blue sea plain, things wide of fin, and things narrow of fin, down in the weeds of the offing, and weeds of the shore. And as to the clothing, with bright cloth, glittering cloth, soft cloth, coarse cloth, will I fulfill their praises, having furnished a white horse, a white boar, and a white cock, and various kinds of things in the presence of the sovereign gods of the harvest. I fulfill their praises by presenting the great offerings of the sovereign grandchild's augustness. Ritual for the wind gods. I declare in the presence of the sovereign gods, whose praises are fulfilled at Tatsuta, because they are not allowed. Firstly, the 5 sorts of grain, with the sovereign grandchild Augustus, who ruled the great country of the many islands at Shikishima, took with the ruddy countenance of his long and lasting food, and things produced by the people, down from the least of the herbs to ripen, and had spoiled them for not 1 year, or for 2 years, but for continuous years. He deigned to command, as to the heart of the god who shall come forth in divinings of all men who are learned in things, declare what god it is. Whereupon, the men learned in things divined with their divinings, but they declared that no heart of a god appears. When they heard this, the sovereign grandchild's Augustness deigned to conjure them, saying, I sought to fulfill their praises as heavenly temples and country temples, without forgetting or omitting, and have so acted, but let the god, whatever god he may be, that has prevented the things produced by the heart of the region under heaven from ripening, and has spoilt them, make known his heart. Hereupon, they made the sovereign grandchild's Augustness to know in a great dream, and they made him know their names, saying, Our names, who have prevented the things made by the people of the region under heaven from ripening and have spoiled them, by visiting them with bad winds and rough waters, are heaven's pillars Augustness and country pillars Augustness. And they made him to know, saying, If for the offerings which shall be set up in our presence there will be furnished various sorts of offerings, as to clothes, bright cloth, glittering cloth, soft cloth, and coarse cloth, and 5 kinds of things, a shield, a spear, a horse furnished with a saddle, if our house be fixed at Wo-nu, in Tachino, in Tatsuya, in the place where our morning sun is opposite, and the evening sun is hidden, and praises be fulfilled in our presence, we will bless and ripen the things produced by the people of the region under heaven. Firstly, the 5 sorts of grain, down to the least of the herbs. Therefore hear, all ye wardens and vergers, by declaring in the presence of the sovereign gods, that, having fixed the house pillars in the place which the sovereign gods had taught by words and made known, in order to fulfill praises in the presence of the sovereign gods, the sovereign grandchild's Augustness has caused this great offerings to be lifted and brought, and has fulfilled their praises, sending the princes and counselors as his messengers. The Fire Ritual. I declare with the great ritual, the heavenly ritual, which is bestowed on him at the time when, by the word of the sovereign's dear progenitor and progenitrice, who divinely remain in the plane of high heaven, they bestowed on him the region under heaven, saying, Let the sovereign grandchild's Augustness tranquilly rule over the country of fresh spikes, which flourishes in the midst of the reed moor as a peaceful region. When the 2 pillars, the divine Izanagi and Izanami's Augustness, younger sister and elder brother, had intercourse, and she deigned to bear the many tens of countries of the countries, and the many tens of islands of the islands, and had deigned to bear all the 100 myriads of gods, she had deigned to bear her dear youngest child of all, the fire producer god, and her hidden parts being burnt, she bid in the rocks, said, My dear elder brother's Augustness, deign not look at me for 7 nights of nights, and 7 days of sunshine. But when, before the 7 days were fulfilled, he looked, thinking her remaining hidden to be strange, she deigned to say, My hidden parts were burnt when I bore fire. At such a time, I said, My dear elder brother's augustness, deign not look upon me, but you violently looked upon me. And after saying, My dear brother's augustness shall rule in the upper country, I shall rule in the lower country. She deigned to hide in the rocks, and having come to the flat hills of darkness, she thought, and said, I have come hither, having borne and left a bad-hearted child in the upper country, ruled over by the illustrious elder brother's augustness. Going back, she bore other children, having borne the water goddess, the gourd, the river weed, and the clay hill maiden, 4 sorts of things. She taught them with words, and made them to know, saying, If the heart of this bad-hearted child becomes violent, let the water goddess take the gourd, and the clay hill maiden take the river weed, and to pacify him. In consequence of this, I fulfill his praises, and say that for the things set up, so he may deign not to be awfully quick of heart in the great place of the sovereign grandchild's augustness. There are provided bright cloth, glittering cloth, soft cloth, and coarse cloth, and 5 kinds of things, as to things which dwell in the blue sea plain, things of wide fin, and things of narrow fin, down to the weeds of the offing and weeds of the shore. As to liquor, raising high the beer jars, filling and ranging in the rows of the bellies of the beer jars, piling up the offerings, even to the rice in grain and rice in ear, like the range of hills, I fulfill his praises with the great ritual, the heavenly ritual. The ritual for evil spirits. I declare, when, by the word of the progenitor and progenitrice, who divinely remained in the plane of high heaven, deigned to make the beginning of things, they divinely deigned to assemble the many myriad hundreds of gods in the high city of heaven, and deigned divinely to take counsel in council, saying, When we cause our sovereign grandchild's augustness to leave heaven's eternal seat, to cleave a path with might through heaven's manifold clouds, and to descend from heaven, with orders tranquilly to rule over the country of fresh spikes, which flourishes in the midst of the reed moors a peaceful country, what god shall we send first to divinely sweep away and subdue the gods who are turbulent in the country of fresh spikes? All of the gods pondered, and declared, You shall send Amenehohi's augustness, and subdue them, declared they. Whereupon they sent him down from heaven, but he did not declare an answer, and having next sent Takemikuma's augustness, he also, obeying his father's words, did not declare an answer. Ame no Wakehiko, also, whom they sent, did not declare an answer, but immediately perished by the calamity of a bird on high. Wherefore, they pondered afresh by the word of the heavenly gods, and having deigned to send down from heaven the 2 pillars of God, Futsunushi and Takemiko Tsuchi, in their augustness, who had deigned divinely to sweep away, and deigned divinely to soften the gods who were turbulent, and silence the rocks, the trees, and the least leaf of herbs, likewise that bad spoken, and caused the sovereign grandchild's augustness to descend from heaven. I fulfill your praises, saying, As the offerings set up, so that the sovereign gods who come from the heavenly house of the sovereign grandchild's augustness, which, after he fixed upon as a peaceful country, the country of great Yamato, where the sun is high, as the center of the countries of the 4 quarters bestowed upon him, when he was thus sent down from heaven, stoutly planning the house pillars of the bottommost rocks, and exalting the crossbeams of the plain of high heaven, the builders had made for his shade from the heavens, and shade from the sun, whereupon, with tranquility he will rule the country as a peaceful country may, without deigning to be turbulent, deigning to be fierce, and deigning to hurt. Knowing, by virtue of their divinity, the things which were begun in the plane of high heaven, deigning to correct the divine correcting, and great correcting, remove hence out from the clean places of the mountain streams which looked far over the 4 quarters, and rule them as our own place. Let the sovereign gods with tranquility take with clear hearts and peaceful offerings, and sufficient offerings, the great offerings which I set up, piling them on tables like the range of hills, providing bright cloth, glittering cloth, soft cloth, and coarse cloth, as a thing to see the plain in, a mirror, as things to play with beads, as things to shoot off, a bow and arrows, as things to strike and cut with, a sword, as a thing which gallops, a horse, as to liquor, raising high the beer jars, filling and ranging in rows the bellies of the beer jars, with grains of rice and ears, as to things which dwell in the high hills soft of hair, and things rough of hair, as to the things which grow in the great field plain, sweet herbs and bitter herbs, as to the things which dwell in the great blue sea plain, things broad of fin and things narrow of fin, down to the weeds of the offing and the weeds of the short, and without deigning to be turbulent, deigning to be fierce, and deigning to hurt, remove out to the wide and clean places of the mountain streams, and by the virtue of their divinity, be tranquil. The ritual of the road god. The priest says, I declare in the presence of the sovereign gods, who look like innumerable piles of rocks, sit closing up in the way of the multitudinous road forkings. Fulfill your praises by declaring your names, youth and maiden of the many road forkings, and come no further gate. And say, for the offerings set up so that you may prevent the servants of the monarch from being poisoned by, and agreeing with the things which shall come roughly acting and hating in the root country, bottom country, and by agreeing with the things which shall come up roughly acting and hating from the root country, the bottom country, that you may guard the bottom of the gate when they come from the bottom, guard the top when they come from the top, guard with nightly guard, as well with the daily guard, and may praise them peacefully, by taking offerings which are set up by piling them like a range of hills, that is to say, providing multitudinous courses of cloth, and many bellies of beer jars, and sitting closing up the way like innumerable piles of rocks in the multitudinous road forkings, deign to praise the sovereign grandchild's augustness eternally and unchanging, and to bless his age as a luxuriant age. The rituals to the sun goddess, Amaterasu. The priest says, Hear all of you, ministers of gods and sanctifiers of offerings, the great ritual, the heavenly ritual, declared in the great presence of from heaven shining great deity, whose praises are fulfilled by setting up in the stout pillars of the great house, and exalting with crossbeam to the plain of high heaven at the sources of the Isuzu River at Uji in Watarahi. The priest says, It is the sovereign's great word, hear all of you, ministers of the gods and sanctifiers of offerings, fulfilling of praises in the 17th day of the 6th moon of the year, as the morning sun goes up in glory, of the Oho Nakatomi, who, having abundantly piled up like a range of hills the tribute thread and sanctified liquor and food, presented as the usage of the people of the deity's houses attributed to her in the 3 departments in the various countries and places, so that she may deign to bless the emperor's life as a long life, and his age as a luxuriant age, eternally and unchangingly, as multitudinous piles of rock. May deign to bless him the child who were born to him, and deigning to cause to flourish the 5 kinds of grain, which the men of 100 functions, and the peasants of the countries in the 4 quarters of the region under heaven, long and peacefully cultivate and to eat, and guarding and benefiting them, deign to bless them, is hidden by the great offering wands. I declare, in the great presence of from heaven shining great deity, who sits in Ise, because the sovereign great goddess bestows to him the countries of the 4 quarters over which her glance extends, as far as the limit where heaven stands up like a wall, as far as the bounds where the country stands up distant, as far as the limit where the blue clouds spread flat, as far as the bounds where the white clouds lie far away in the blue sea plain, as far as the limit whither come the prows of ships without drying poles or paddles, ships which continuously crowd on the great sea plain, and the roads which men travel by land, as far as the limit whither come the horse's hoof, with baggage cords tightly tied, treading the uneven rocks and tree roots, and standing up continuously in the long path without a break, making the narrow countries wide, and the hilly countries plain, as it were drawing together the distant countries, by throwing tens of ropes over them. He will pile up the first fruits, like the range of hills in the great presence of the sovereign great goddess, and will peacefully enjoy the remainder. The Purification Ritual. Amongst the various sorts of offenses which may be committed in ignorance or out of negligence by heaven's increasing people, who shall come into the being of this country with the sovereign grandchild's augustness, hiding in the fresh residence, built by stoutly planting the house pillars at the bottommost rocks, and exalting the cross beams to the plain of high heaven, as his shade from heavens and shade from the sun, shall with tranquillity rule as a peaceful country, namely the country of great Yamato, where the sun is seen on high, which will be fixed upon as a peaceful country, as the center of the countries of the 4 quarters thus bestowed upon him, breaking the ridges, filling up the watercourses, opening the sluices, doubly sowing, planting stakes, flaying alive, flaying backwards, dunging. Many of such offenses are distinguished by heavenly offenses, and as earthly offenses, cutting living flesh, cutting dead flesh, leprosy, pride in flesh, the offense committed with one's own mother, the offense committed with one's own child, the offense committed with mother and child, the offense committed with child and mother, the offense committed with beasts, calamities of crawling worms, calamities of the god on high, calamities of birds on high, and the offenses of killing beasts and using incantations. Many of such offenses may be disclosed. When it has been said thus, the heavenly gods will push open heaven's eternal gates, and cleaving a path with might through the manifold clouds will hear, and the country gods, ascending to the top of the high mountains and the tops of the low hills, and tearing asunder the mists of the high mountains and the mists of the low hills, will bear. And when they have thus heard, the maiden of descent into the current, who dwells in the current of the swift stream which boils down the ravines from the tops of the high mountains and the tops of the low hills, shall carry out to the great sea plain the offences which are carried away and purified, so that no remaining offence, like as Shinato's wind, blows apart the manifold clouds of heaven, as the morning wind and the evening wind blow away the morning mist and the evening mist, as the great ships which lie on the shore of the great port loosen their prows, loosen their sterns to push away into the great sea plain, as the trunks of the great forest trees, far and near, are cleared away with the sharp sickle, the sickle forged with fire, so that there cease to be any offence called an offence in the court of the sovereign grandchild's augustness to begin with, and the countries of the four quarters of the region under heaven. And when she thus carries them away and out, the deity called Maiden of the Swift Cleansing, who dwells in the multitudinous meetings of the sea water, the multitudinous currents of rough sea waves shall gulp them down, these offences, and thus she gulped them down, the Lord of breath-blowing place, who dwells in the breath-blowing place, shall utterly blow them away with his breath to the root country, the bottommost of countries. And when he has thus blown them away, the deity called Maiden of Swift Banishment, who dwells within the root country, the bottom of countries, shall completely banish them, and be rid of them. And when they are thus gotten rid of, there shall be from this day onward no offence which shall be called offence, with regard to the men of the offices who serve in the court of the sovereign, nor in the four quarters of the region under heaven. Thus the priest says, "Hear all of you, how he leads forth the horse as a thing that erects its ears plain towards the high of heaven, and deigns to sweep away and purify with the general purification, as the evening sun goes down on the last day of the watery moon of the year. O diviners of the four countries, take the sacrifices away out the river highway, and sweep them away." Thus ends the Yengishiki.